I stood in the marble lobby of Sterling and Associates, clutching my baby carrier while security escorted me to what used to be my corner office on the 42nd floor. 3 months ago, I was their youngest senior marketing director in company history. Today, they were moving me to a windowless cubicle in the basement and calling it a transitional reintegration opportunity. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The elevator descended past floors I used to command, past conference rooms where I'd closed million-dollar deals, past the executive suite where my campaign strategies had generated $200 million in new revenue last year alone. The same revenue that earned Sterling and Associates the Industry Excellence Award while I was on maternity leave. The same award they'd accepted without mentioning my name once. The reception hall sparkled under crystal chandeliers, each table adorned with fresh orchids and gold-trimmed place cards bearing the Sterling and Associates logo. I adjusted my black dress, the first professional outfit that fit since giving birth to Emma 3 months ago, and scanned the room for my assigned seat. Table 12 should have been near the front, reserved for senior leadership. Instead, I found myself relegated to table 37, tucked behind a pillar where the acoustics died, and the view consisted mainly of service doors. A server approached with champagne flutes balanced on a silver tray. I accepted one but couldn't bring myself to drink. My stomach had been twisted in knots since receiving the gala invitation 2 weeks ago, addressed simply to marketing team member, rather than senior marketing director Sarah Chen. The omission felt deliberate, calculated, like everything else that had happened since I'd announced my pregnancy 18 months earlier. The lights dimmed and Jonathan Sterling himself took the podium, his silver hair perfectly styled, his smile radiating the confidence of a man who'd built an empire on other people's brilliance. Tonight, he began, his voice carrying easily through the sound system, we celebrate unprecedented growth. Our Velocity digital campaign didn't just meet expectations, it shattered them, bringing in over $200 million in new business and establishing Sterling and Associates as the undisputed leader in luxury brand marketing. Applause thundered through the ballroom. I remained seated, my hands folded in my lap, watching the massive screen behind Jonathan display campaign materials I'd conceptualized during late nights in my home office, sketches I'd drawn while fighting morning sickness, strategies I'd refined between doctor appointments and prenatal vitamins. Every slide, every tagline, every innovative approach bore the unmistakable signature of my creative vision. Then came the moment I'd been dreading. Please join me in recognizing the brilliant mind behind this success, Jonathan continued, his arm extending toward a table near the stage. Madison Sterling, our newly appointed Chief Creative Officer, and my daughter, whose fresh perspective and innovative thinking transformed our approach to digital engagement. The spotlight found Madison immediately. She rose gracefully, her blonde hair catching the light, her emerald dress clearly custom-tailored for this moment. At 28, she possessed the kind of polished confidence that came from never doubting your place in the world, never questioning whether you deserved the opportunities handed to you. She waved demurely, her smile practiced and camera-ready. I felt the champagne flute slip from my fingers, hitting the carpet with a muffled thud. Madison Sterling, who 6 months ago couldn't distinguish between demographic targeting and psychographic profiling, was being celebrated for work that had consumed 18 months of my life. The campaign that had kept me awake until 3 a.m, researching consumer behavior patterns and crafting messaging frameworks that spoke to luxury buyers' deepest psychological triggers. The woman sitting beside me, someone from accounting whose name I couldn't recall, leaned over with a conspiratorial whisper. Isn't it wonderful how talent runs in families? Madison must have inherited her father's marketing genius. I nodded mechanically, unable to trust my voice, watching as Madison accepted a crystal award engraved with words that should have been mine. My phone buzzed against my clutch. A notification from Sterling and Associates HR. Organizational restructuring update. Effective immediately. Your role has been adjusted to align with current operational needs. Please review the attached documentation regarding your updated compensation and responsibilities. I opened the attachment with trembling fingers. The document was clinical in its brutality. My salary had been reduced by 35%. My title changed from Senior Marketing Director to Marketing Coordinator. My direct reports reassigned to other departments. My corner office relocated to the basement level, all framed as strategic workforce optimization and enhanced operational efficiency. From across the ballroom, Madison's laughter carried over the crowd as she posed for photographs with board members and major clients. She held the award like she'd earned it, like she'd spent countless hours analyzing market research and testing message variations, like she'd sacrificed sleep and personal time to perfect every detail, like she'd built something meaningful instead of simply inheriting it. I gathered my purse and headed for the exit, weaving between tables where my former colleagues celebrated achievements they barely understood. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped onto the sidewalk, and for the first time in hours I could breathe properly. Behind me, the gala continued in full swing, but I was already calculating the changes ahead. By Monday morning, my nameplate had been removed from the frosted glass door of my former office. In its place hung a simple sign reading, Conference Room C, East Wing. A facilities manager with an apologetic expression handed me a cardboard box labeled Personal Effects and directed me to the elevator that would take me 3 floors below ground level. The basement of Sterling and Associates felt like a different company entirely. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across beige walls that hadn't seen an update since the building's construction in the 80s. My new workspace consisted of a gray cubicle wedged between the copy machine and a supply closet, with barely enough room for a computer monitor and a phone that connected to an extension nobody would ever call. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They called it a lateral transition. I called it exile disguised as corporate restructuring. The morning briefings I used to lead were now managed by Madison, who read from notes clearly prepared by someone else. The strategic planning sessions that had once been built around my insights now proceeded without any input from the marketing department's basement level. My calendar, once packed with client presentations and creative reviews, now contained appointments for legacy project documentation and, quote, knowledge transfer sessions. Corporate euphemisms for slowly extracting everything valuable from my brain before making my position redundant entirely. Madison Sterling, armed with an MBA from Wharton and her father's unconditional support, had assumed control of strategies and campaigns she couldn't have conceived independently. At her first department meeting, she stood before the same whiteboard where I'd mapped out the customer journey for our most successful luxury automotive campaign and announced with absolute certainty, we're going to modernize our approach and inject fresh energy into our creative processes. Translation: she planned to dismantle frameworks that had generated hundreds of millions in revenue and replace them with trendy concepts she'd learned in graduate school. She had already reassigned my 2 most talented designers to different projects. Now I watched as junior associates I had mentored began requesting my campaign files for reference purposes, while developing new proposals under Madison's supervision. My research methodologies were being repackaged as preliminary insights in client presentations. Even my brand positioning strategies had been converted into template documents with Madison's initials prominently displayed in the headers. I responded to their requests. I provided the documentation they needed. I watched from my basement cubicle as years of my professional life were redistributed and rebranded. But in that watching, I began to notice patterns they hadn't anticipated. Dependencies they didn't understand. Connections they had overlooked. Most importantly, I started to remember something they had forgotten about entirely. Something that would prove they had underestimated exactly who they were dealing with. It was nearly midnight when I pulled the file cabinet open in my home office, dust particles dancing in the lamplight as I searched through folders I hadn't touched since Emma's birth. Client contracts, project timelines, budget allocations, and buried beneath layers of campaign materials, a thin manila folder marked Velocity Digital, Proprietary Methodologies, Confidential. My hands hesitated over the folder's edge. Inside were the original frameworks I had developed independently, before Sterling and Associates, during the 2 years I had operated my own consulting practice, the targeting algorithms I had created using my personal software licenses. The consumer psychology models I had refined through private research funded from my own savings account. When Sterling and Associates recruited me 4 years ago, I had brought these methodologies with me as part of my consulting package. The legal department had reviewed the intellectual property agreements, but in their eagerness to acquire my expertise, they had missed a crucial detail buried in the fine print of our negotiation. Clause 12, subsection D stated clearly, proprietary methodologies developed prior to employment remain the intellectual property of the original creator. License for use expires upon termination of employment or material change in role responsibilities, unless renewed through separate agreement. My signature appeared alone on the licensing document. Sarah Chen, not Sterling and Associates, not Jonathan Sterling, just me. And the material change in my role responsibilities, from senior marketing director to marketing coordinator, had automatically triggered the license expiration clause. They had built their entire Velocity Digital success on foundations that legally belonged to me. The consumer segmentation models that had identified untapped luxury markets. The emotional trigger mapping that had doubled conversion rates. The predictive analytics that had revolutionized their approach to client acquisition. All of it was mine. Developed during late nights in my apartment years before I had ever heard of Sterling and Associates. I sat back in my desk chair, Emma sleeping peacefully in her crib nearby, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, exactly. Not even satisfaction. Just a crystal clear understanding of exactly what came next. They had tried to erase me from their success story, but their success was built on my intellectual property. And that property was about to be withdrawn. I didn't need to sabotage anything. I didn't need to breach any systems or steal any data. I was simply going to reclaim what had always been mine and let them discover what their campaigns looked like without the foundation that had made them possible. The first methodology I reclaimed was the emotional resonance matrix, a system I had developed for identifying the precise psychological triggers that motivated luxury purchases. It wasn't flashy or obvious, just essential for any campaign targeting high net worth consumers. Without it, their messaging would begin to feel generic, untargeted, desperate. Next, I withdrew the predictive customer journey mapping tool, something I had embedded so deeply into their campaign development process that most of the team didn't even realize it was a separate system. They would notice when their conversion rates started declining, when their carefully orchestrated touchpoints began feeling disjointed and ineffective. Then came the advanced demographic synthesis protocol, which I had nicknamed the connector, because it identified the hidden relationships between seemingly unrelated consumer segments. Without it, their market research would remain surface level, their targeting would lose precision, and their campaigns would waste budget on audiences that would never convert. By Friday, I started seeing the first signs of strain. Madison's team had launched a campaign for a luxury watch brand that was performing significantly below projections. The messaging felt flat, the targeting seemed scattered, and the emotional engagement metrics were dropping by the day. They blamed seasonal variations and increased competition, running additional focus groups and adjusting media spend without understanding the deeper issue. I monitored the results from my basement cubicle, watching performance dashboards that showed declining engagement across all their major accounts. Not catastrophic failures that would trigger immediate panic, but consistent underperformance that would gradually erode client confidence and internal morale. The patterns were becoming visible to those who knew how to look. Campaign after campaign launching with great fanfare but failing to achieve the breakthrough results that had made Sterling and Associates famous. Creative concepts that looked impressive in presentations but couldn't connect with their intended audiences on an emotional level. By the following week, the whispers had started. Madison's assistant forwarded increasingly urgent emails about client concerns and budget overruns. Account managers began scheduling damage control meetings with clients who were questioning the return on their marketing investments. The seamless success machine that had been Sterling and Associates was beginning to show cracks. But I wasn't the only one who had begun to notice the correlation between my demotion and the company's declining performance. Late Thursday evening, as I was packing up my few personal items from the basement cubicle, I found an email that had been forwarded to me by mistake. The message was from David Rodriguez, Sterling and Associates Chief Financial Officer, to Jonathan Sterling himself. Subject line: Velocity Digital Performance Analysis. Urgent review required. I opened it with steady hands, already knowing what I would find. Jonathan, we need to discuss the metrics from our major campaigns since Sarah Chen's role transition. Performance across all luxury brand accounts has declined by an average of 43%. Client retention is showing warning signs, and 3 major contracts are up for renewal next quarter. I've run the analysis multiple times, but the correlation is undeniable. We may have made a strategic error in our personnel decisions. I printed the email, folded it carefully, and placed it in my purse. David Rodriguez had been with the company for 12 years. He understood the numbers better than anyone, and he had connected the dots that Madison and her father had been too proud to see. That night, I fed Emma her bottle while reviewing the intellectual property documentation one final time. Everything was in order. Every legal detail had been confirmed. Every methodology that had built Sterling & Associates' reputation for the past 4 years was about to be reclaimed by its rightful owner. I wasn't planning to announce my intentions or issue any warnings. They had chosen to treat me as if I were disposable, as if my contributions were easily replaceable by someone with the right last name and an expensive education. They were about to learn the difference between inheriting an opportunity and earning it through years of dedicated work. But first, I was going to build something better. Something that would show the entire industry exactly what Sarah Chen was capable of when she wasn't being limited by other people's expectations or constrained by someone else's vision of her worth. I opened my laptop and began sketching the framework for what would become Chen Creative Strategies, built on methodologies that had never been replicated because they had never belonged to Sterling & Associates in the first place. Every algorithm, every consumer insight model, every psychological trigger mapping system would be implemented correctly this time, with proper attribution and unlimited potential for growth. This wasn't about revenge. This was about justice. And justice, I was beginning to understand, sometimes meant showing people exactly what they had lost when they chose to undervalue what they could never replace. The extraction began on a Tuesday morning. I didn't announce my intentions or send dramatic resignation letters. I simply opened my laptop and began the methodical process of reclaiming what had never belonged to Sterling & Associates in the first place. The emotional resonance matrix was the first to go, not deleted or destroyed, simply withdrawn from their systems and returned to its rightful owner. The process was surprisingly simple. A few keystrokes to revoke the licensing agreements, a series of emails to third-party data providers confirming the termination of shared access protocols, and suddenly, the sophisticated targeting system that had driven their luxury campaigns for 4 years was no longer available to them. They wouldn't notice immediately. The system had been so seamlessly integrated into their workflow that most employees didn't even realize it was a separate tool. Within days, I watched their newest campaign launch, with all the fanfare Sterling & Associates was famous for. Madison had personally presented the strategy to their biggest client, a European luxury automotive brand worth $50 million annually. The creative looked stunning in the presentation: sleek visuals, compelling copy, impressive media placement strategy. But without the emotional resonance matrix guiding the messaging, the campaign felt hollow, generic, like every other luxury brand advertisement flooding the market. Next, I reclaimed the predictive customer journey mapping system. This one took longer to extract because I had embedded it so deeply into their campaign development process that removing it required careful coordination with multiple software platforms. But by Friday, Sterling & Associates had lost access to the tool that had revolutionized how they understood consumer behavior across digital touchpoints. The impact was immediate. Their weekend campaign launch for a high-end jewelry client completely missed the mark. The messaging sequence that should have guided potential customers from awareness to purchase felt disjointed and confusing. Engagement rates dropped 40% from their projected targets. Conversion tracking showed customers abandoning the purchase process at critical decision points that the predictive journey mapping system would have optimized automatically. I monitored the results from my basement cubicle while nursing Emma during my lunch break. The performance dashboards told a story of gradual decline, masked by increasingly desperate adjustments to media spending and targeting parameters. Madison's team was working harder than ever, staying late to analyze data they couldn't properly interpret, scheduling emergency strategy sessions to address problems they couldn't identify. By the end of the week, I had withdrawn the advanced demographic synthesis protocol as well. This system had been my masterpiece, a tool that identified hidden connections between consumer segments that appeared unrelated on the surface but shared deep psychological motivations. Without it, their market research would remain superficial, their targeting would lose precision, and their campaigns would waste budget reaching audiences that would never convert to actual sales. The signs of systematic failure were becoming impossible to ignore. Account managers started scheduling damage control meetings with increasingly concerned clients. Madison's confident presentations began including more disclaimers about quote 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 what seem quote 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 quote. The seamless success machine that had been Sterling and Associates for the past 4 years was beginning to reveal the foundation it had been built on. But I wasn't satisfied with simply watching their decline. Every evening, after putting Emma to bed, I worked on building something better. Chen Creative Strategies wasn't going to be a revenge project or a desperate attempt to prove my worth. It was going to be the company I should have been allowed to build within Sterling and Associates if they had valued innovation over nepotism. I started by reaching out to former colleagues who had left Sterling and Associates over the years, talented people who had been frustrated by the company's increasingly political environment. Maria Santos, a brilliant data analyst who had quit after being passed over for promotion 3 times. James Wilson, a creative director who had grown tired of seeing his best concepts watered down by committee decisions. Rebecca Park, a client relations specialist who had built relationships that transcended individual agencies. Each conversation followed a similar pattern. Initial surprise at hearing from me, followed by curiosity about my current situation, then genuine excitement when I described my vision for Chen Creative Strategies. They had all witnessed the same systemic problems at Sterling and Associates: the prioritization of family connections over professional competence, the tendency to take credit for other people's innovations, the gradual erosion of the creative excellence that had once defined the company. Within 3 weeks, I had assembled a core team of 6 professionals who brought complementary skills and shared values. More importantly, they brought their own client relationships, their own reputations, and their own networks of industry connections. We weren't starting from zero. We were starting from a foundation of proven expertise and established trust. The first client came through Rebecca's network, a tech startup preparing for a major product launch with a budget of $2 million. The founder had worked with Rebecca at her previous agency and specifically requested her involvement in their marketing strategy. When Rebecca explained that she was now part of Chen Creative Strategies, he didn't hesitate to sign our contract. Our second client was even more significant. Maria had maintained relationships with several luxury brands during her time away from the agency world, providing freelance analytics consulting when their internal teams needed additional expertise. When one of these brands expressed frustration with their current agency's declining performance, Maria recommended they consider Chen Creative Strategies for their next campaign. The brand was Montrose Luxury Watches, and they had been one of Sterling and Associates' most prestigious clients until recently. Their latest campaign with Madison's team had underperformed so dramatically that they were actively seeking alternatives. Maria arranged an introductory meeting for the following week. I spent 3 days preparing for that presentation, not because I doubted my capabilities, but because I wanted to demonstrate exactly what Montrose had been missing. Using the emotional resonance matrix and predictive customer journey mapping systems that I had developed and refined over years of research, I created a campaign strategy that addressed every weakness in their recent marketing efforts. The presentation lasted 90 minutes. I walked them through a comprehensive analysis of their target market, identifying psychological triggers that their previous campaigns had completely overlooked. I showed them customer journey maps that revealed critical touchpoints, where their competitors were failing to engage effectively. I demonstrated targeting methodologies that would reach high-net-worth consumers who had never been approached by luxury watch brands before. By the end of the meeting, Montrose's marketing director was asking about timeline and budget rather than whether they wanted to work with us. They signed a 6-month contract worth $8 million before I left their offices that afternoon. Word spread quickly through the luxury marketing ecosystem. Within days, I was fielding inquiries from brands that had heard about our Montrose presentation through industry connections. Not desperate companies looking for cheap alternatives, but established brands that valued innovation and results over agency prestige and family connections. Each new client brought validation that extended beyond financial success. These were professionals who had built their careers on recognizing excellence, and they were choosing Chen Creative Strategies because they understood the difference between inherited opportunity and earned expertise. They had seen enough marketing presentations to distinguish between polished mediocrity and genuine strategic insight. Meanwhile, Sterling & Associates was struggling with problems that seemed to multiply exponentially. Their client retention rate had dropped to 60%, the lowest in company history. 3 major accounts had declined to renew their contracts, citing disappointing campaign performance and lack of strategic innovation. Madison's team was working overtime to develop new pitches and salvage existing relationships, but they were fighting battles with inadequate weapons. The industry publications began to notice. Marketing Weekly published an article titled "Sterling & Associates: Has Success Bred Complacency?" that analyzed their recent campaign failures in uncomfortable detail. The piece questioned whether the agency's reputation was still supported by current performance or simply coasting on past achievements. More damaging was a case study published in Campaign Strategy Quarterly that compared Sterling & Associates' recent luxury automotive campaign with a competing campaign developed by a smaller agency. The analysis revealed fundamental flaws in audience targeting and message sequencing that any experienced marketer should have avoided. Industry professionals who read the article began questioning Sterling & Associates' continued dominance in the luxury marketing sector. I didn't gloat over these developments. I was too busy building something meaningful to waste energy celebrating someone else's decline. Chen Creative Strategies was growing beyond my initial projections, not because we were benefiting from Sterling & Associates' problems, but because we were solving client challenges that the larger agency had never properly addressed. Our success was creating opportunities I hadn't anticipated. Venture capital firms were reaching out about potential expansion funding. International brands were inquiring about our availability for global campaigns. Industry publications were requesting interviews about our innovative approaches to luxury marketing. The transformation felt surreal. 6 months earlier, I had been relegated to a basement cubicle, watching my professional contributions be attributed to someone else. Now I was building a company that was reshaping how the industry thought about consumer psychology and campaign development. The validation came in forms I hadn't expected. James Wilson, our creative director, told me that Chen Creative Strategies was the first agency where he felt his ideas were truly valued rather than simply tolerated. Maria mentioned that our data-driven approach allowed her to contribute insights that had been dismissed as too complex at larger agencies. Rebecca said that clients respected our strategic recommendations in ways that felt authentic rather than performative. But the most meaningful validation came from an unexpected source. David Rodriguez, Sterling & Associates' chief financial officer, requested a private meeting to discuss, quote, potential collaboration opportunities. We met at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant where we could speak without industry colleagues overhearing our conversation. David was direct in ways that corporate executives rarely allowed themselves to be. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll give me an honest answer. Is there any correlation between your departure from our senior marketing team and the performance issues we've been experiencing? I considered my response carefully. David, I think the better question is whether Sterling & Associates ever properly understood what was driving their success during the years when everything seemed effortless. He nodded slowly, understanding the implication without requiring explicit details. The board is concerned. Jonathan is concerned. We're hemorrhaging clients, and our reputation is suffering in ways that quarterly financial adjustments can't fix. What are you asking me? I'm asking whether there's any possibility of you returning to Sterling & Associates in a role that properly reflects your contributions. Senior Vice President of Strategic Innovation. Your own budget, your own team, complete creative control over major campaigns. The offer was tempting in ways I hadn't anticipated. It represented vindication, acknowledgement that they had made a strategic error in demoting me after my maternity leave. It offered financial security and professional recognition that would erase the humiliation of the past several months. But it also represented a return to an environment where I had been systematically undervalued, where my contributions had been attributed to others, where family connections mattered more than professional competence. Chen Creative Strategies was allowing me to build something from the ground up, to create the kind of agency I had always envisioned but never been permitted to develop. David, I appreciate the offer more than you know, but I'm not interested in returning to Sterling and Associates in any capacity. His expression showed disappointment but not surprise. I was afraid you'd say that. Can I ask what it would take to change your mind? There's nothing that would change my mind. I'm building something better. 3 days later, industry publications reported that Chen Creative Strategies had been selected as the lead agency for Meridian International's global luxury brand portfolio, a contract worth $40 million annually. The announcement included quotes from Meridian's executives, specifically praising our innovative approaches to consumer psychology and strategic campaign development. The same day, Sterling & Associates announced that Madison Sterling would be, quote, transitioning to a strategic advisory role, while the company conducted a, quote, comprehensive review of creative leadership. Translation: Jonathan Sterling's daughter was being quietly removed from the position she should never have been given, but corporate politics required face-saving language rather than honest acknowledgement of the mistake. I didn't feel satisfaction at Madison's demotion. I felt sad for the waste of talent and opportunity that occurred when organizations prioritized family loyalty over professional competence. Madison might have developed into a capable marketing professional if she had been allowed to earn her position through gradual advancement rather than being thrust into leadership roles she wasn't prepared for. But my focus was on building rather than reflecting on others' failures. Chen Creative Strategies was expanding into international markets, developing partnerships with European luxury brands, and establishing methodologies that were being studied by business schools as examples of innovative consumer engagement. The morning I received notification that we had been selected as Agency of the Year by the International Luxury Marketing Association, I was sitting in my home office while Emma played with blocks nearby. The award recognized not just our campaign results but our contributions to advancing the field of consumer psychology research and strategic brand positioning. That evening, our entire team gathered to celebrate at a restaurant overlooking the city. Looking around the table at professionals who had chosen to bet their careers on Chen Creative Strategies, I felt something I hadn't experienced during my years at Sterling & Associates: genuine pride in work that belonged entirely to the people who had created it. Maria raised her glass for a toast. 6 months ago, most of us were working for agencies that treated us like replaceable resources. Tonight, we're celebrating recognition for work that represents the best of what we're capable of achieving. James added, what we've built here isn't just a successful business. It's proof that excellence doesn't require compromise, that innovation doesn't require politics, and that the best work happens when people are valued for their actual contributions rather than their connections. Rebecca's toast was the most meaningful. Sarah, you didn't just create an agency. You created an environment where talent is recognized, where ideas are respected, and where success belongs to the people who earn it. As I looked around the table at professionals who had chosen to follow my vision rather than accept the limitations imposed by larger organizations, I realized that Chen Creative Strategies had become something more valuable than revenge against Sterling & Associates. It had become evidence that excellence, when properly supported and directed, could overcome any obstacle. The company that had tried to erase my contributions was now studying our methodologies, trying to reverse engineer the strategic approaches that I had developed and they had lost access to. But what they couldn't replicate was the culture of authentic collaboration and mutual respect that had attracted the industry's best talent to Chen Creative Strategies. Sterling & Associates would survive their current challenges. They would hire new talent, develop new strategies, and eventually restore their client relationships through persistent effort and strategic adjustments. But they would never again achieve the effortless excellence that had defined their reputation during the years when my contributions had driven their success. And I was fine with that, because I had built something better, something that belonged entirely to the people who had earned it, something that would grow and evolve without requiring anyone to sacrifice their integrity or accept less recognition than they deserved. Chen Creative Strategies wasn't just my professional redemption. It was proof that the most powerful response to being undervalued isn't anger or resentment, but the quiet determination to build something so excellent that it speaks for itself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.